Hey kids, are you interested in some arbitrary drama? Okay, but first, a brief history lesson. The oldest scientific academy in the world, the Royal Society, was founded in 1660 in the UK. Their Latin motto was in nullius verba, which roughly translates to no one's words. In plainer English, the motto could be roughly translated to take no one's word for it. According to their website today, it is an expression of the determination of fellows to withstand the domination of authority and to verify all statements by an appeal to facts determined by experiment. This philosophy remains the center of the scientific mindset. What matters should not be who is speaking, but what they can prove. In 1989, Dr. Randall J. Strossen introduced the world to super squats, how to gain 30 pounds of muscle in 6 weeks. To describe this title's claim as big words would be the equivalent of calling Andre the Giant a big guy. Inscribed in the slim volume are the detailed instructions of what would become one of the most infamous bulking programs of all time.
Every time I think about it, I want to puke.
The centerpiece of the program is a set of 20 squats performed at the weight you'd normally use for 10 reps. You do it 3 times a week, adding 5 pounds a session. If this sounds physically impossible to you, you are right. But Super Squats has a trick up its sleeve: deep breathing. Specifically, you're instructed to take 2 or 3 huge breaths in before each rep. This gives you little recovery breaks, what we would today call rest pauses, that make it possible to grind your way all the way to 20. The program promises that this deep breathing will also grow your upper body, not just your legs, with the assistance of a light set of pullovers. How does Strossen claim this happens? By literally expanding your rib cage. And I'm sure after 6 weeks of training like this, you could measure your rib cage afterwards and see that the circumference has increased. Lo and behold, you must have a larger rib cage now, right? Right? One thing that has become apparent in recent years is that muscles grow in response to high tension in lengthened positions. We even know a little bit about the mechanisms at play. So, for an exercise like a pullover, which places the lats into a stretched position with your arms over your head, that could increase the amount of muscle over your ribs, which when measured will show an increased circumference. So Strossen was right that the program would increase the size of your rib cage. He was just wrong about how and why. Because in the written version of the program, he doesn't actually prescribe the pullover as the stretching movement. The exercise listed is the Raider chest pull, an isometric movement where you try to pull down as hard as possible on a fixed object like the pole of a power rack. You'll feel your lats working, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is the most effective way to build muscle. So if you perform this program as it is written in the book, you would see gains, but you'd potentially walk away with the wrong idea of how it happened, and you'll probably see less growth than you could have if you had plugged in a more effective exercise into that slot. Decades of lifting culture have taught people like Strossen what works when it comes to building muscle, but it was science that helped us to understand how, and thus how we can avoid making misguided choices along the way. So, knowing all of this, and I'm pretty sure none of this is controversial, why are we currently seeing a backlash against science-based lifting? If you're half as plugged into YouTube fitness as I am, you've probably seen that over the last year there's been growing opposition to science-based content and the creators behind it. It's gotten to the point that the guy arguably at the center of the science-based movement, Jeff Nippard, has made a full-length video to address this growing animosity. If you haven't watched it yet, it is worth a look, but who am I kidding? You've watched it. With this video, I would like to dive in a little bit deeper into why this backlash seems to be happening right now and what the average lifter should take away from it. Now, for context, you don't necessarily see a lot of people who are opposed to science itself. What I'm mostly seeing now are arguments that, one, exercise science is a flawed or soft science and therefore doesn't provide practical guidance. 2, that science-based lifters are causing harm by convincing lifters to focus on small details that probably don't matter. And 3, that science-based lifters don't train hard enough and get worse results than more experience-based lifters. Since I'm not looking to strawman anybody here, I will look at the arguments put forward by the influencers who seem to have the biggest impact on this discussion. As far as I can tell, the first big video on this topic was by Alexander Bromley about 3 years ago. If you aren't familiar, Bromley is a world-class competitive strongman and coach who has been on YouTube for about 6 years. He might be the biggest lifting history nerd on planet Earth, and I found his book Base Strength to be a solid manual and very readable for going from zero to Godzilla. He's a smart guy and very articulate. And so when he published a video called The Science-Based Scam, people listened. The trouble is, instead of demonstrating familiarity with the variety of creators who have labeled themselves as science-based, he lumped people like Jeff Nippard, Jeremy Ethier, Barbell Medicine, Joel Seedman, and Ryan Humiston all into the same category. None of these creators interpret or present science in the same way.
These are usually channels that are headed by people with better than average physiques, usually nothing exceptional, usually not high performance accolades or a really deep coaching background, but they do have an advanced degree.
I think it offers some insight into the chip on his shoulder that he seems to carry as a result of his own experience seeking higher education.
I take this approach because as a health professional and kinesiologist myself, I value science.
Which I had to try not to laugh at. And again, I'm not saying that there isn't utility in these fields or that they are void of any educational value, but as an institution that represents the cutting edge of our field, kinesiology isn't even close. I took the first year of kinesiology at Cal State San Bernardino, which is actually known for its kinesiology program. That's when I thought this was going to be my career. Well, eventually did become my career, but I figured out very quickly that you don't need to go in debt and getting a degree if this is what you want to do. Personal training is easy. All you need is a certification. And if you work for yourself, you don't even need that. What I found quickly is that what they offer to the kinesiology coursework is either things that you can find through a year's worth of muscle and fitness subscriptions, or things that go above and beyond that and offer a bunch of trivia that really doesn't offer any changes or any action that you can make to your approach.
The logic is a little reminiscent of my days in theater where, let's say somebody saw a boring play, and a lot of them are, if I'm being honest with you, comparing it to seeing a bad episode of a TV show or a bad movie, someone who saw a bad play would be more likely to write off the medium in its entirety and say things like, theater is not for me. Now, while I think that that is unfair, I do understand that YouTube is basically free, whereas going out to a theater and paying an expensive ticket price makes you more likely to view this with skepticism, since you're being asked to give time and money to something you're not sure is going to add any value to your life. And I think his experience of overpaying for an under-delivered education got distilled in his mind to exercise science degrees are pointless, which then got distilled further into exercise science is pointless. Now, recently, Bromley elaborated on this with the video titled, Exercise Science is Killing Your Gains. This video is far better researched, and it leans heavily on interviews and quotes from Greg Nuckols, Eric Helms, James Krieger, Brad Schoenfeld, and Lyle McDonald. Now, these are experts who are critiquing their own field based on their own experience working in it, and Bromley distills it down to 4 key issues. Now, where the scientists in the video clearly intend to continue their work, Bromley concludes that lifters, by and large, would be better off ignoring exercise science.
The short answer is to throw optimal out the fucking window. We can hypothesize that a thing called optimal exists, but the resolution given in the research doesn't come close to finding that for you or telling you how to find it yourself. So, with respect to what you do in the gym between this week and next, your optimal path is not best out of the field of all possibilities. Optimal is just something instead of nothing, and it turns out that there are a lot of ways to get the body to do something, and absolutely none of it has anything to do with the number of PubMed articles that you've read.
And it's not actually bad advice when it comes to a recreational lifter. You don't need this level of fine-tuning and nuance. You just need to know what is working for you. But the built-in assumption is that one can only make training decisions with either experience or science. And I disagree, but we will come back to that. Since Bromley was good enough to specify who his critiques are directed at in his videos, I think it's worth doing a quick profile on who these figures are. While they all use science as a pretty key part of their branding in some cases, that's sometimes where the similarities end. Let's start with the obvious one, Jeff Nippert. Nippert's channel has been going for a decade, starting with a surprising number of videos with sushi in the titles and thumbnails. He's put his money where his mouth is by actually funding and publishing research, including a recent study comparing lengthened partials to full range of motion. He absolutely does spam the word science in a lot of his titles and thumbnails, even on content that is almost entirely based on his opinions and experience. More often, though, he does cite his sources in the videos themselves, as well as linking the papers in his descriptions. He's easily the biggest fish in the pond with over 6 million subscribers, so it is easy to see why he's the name that comes up the most often. Dr. Mike Israetel, who is so science-based that he is literally the co-author of 2 books on the scientific principles of strength and hypertrophy training. Renaissance periodization has been on YouTube for 12 years now, with Israetel himself experiencing a recent increase in popularity, as he appears on just about every podcast and channel in existence. Israetel has held powerlifting world records before switching over to bodybuilding. He's openly enhanced and has reflected on the negative impact that's had on his health.
I recently took a validated, empirically validated, scientifically based scale for anxiety. And actually currently, right now, I have severe anxiety disorder. It's probably the most severe type of anxiety disorder, short of like panic disorder.
He has a PhD in sport physiology, which allows him to go by Dr. Mike, a title for which he now has to fiercely compete. He's also worked as a professor, which shows in his ability to just talk to a camera with bullet points next to him for an hour and still keep an audience's attention. He's been critiqued for combining his own opinions with science and treating them with the same weight.
He rarely cites empirical literature directly, and much of his advice does rely on thought experiments, deductive reasoning, and therefore rationalist discourse.
More recently, he's decided to start an entire separate philosophy channel where he can express opinions that are sometimes kind of troubling. Basically, the guy likes to talk, and he's good at it. And it's made it possible for him to make a living off of having strong opinions and also gay jokes.
I just want to be seen by you, Jason. Ideally, in the nude.
Next up, we have Dr. Joel Seedman, the self-described most controversial figure in fitness. I don't agree with this title, because controversial suggests that there are arguments for and against. Joel Seedman is the most dunked on figure in fitness.
Okay, so we already know where this guy, what this guy is all about. What is no one else doing? And I'm going to do that. If someone else has done it, it's not good.
He convinces you that like this is what you need, and then you get into his funnel and you start buying his shit. You subscribe to his newsletter, whatever he has, and buy his stupid ebook and all this other dumb shit. I'm bringing violence today, fellas. I've had enough of charlatan nonsense. Ain't no more nuance left in this motherfucker. Fuck you, Joel Seedman.
He has a PhD in kinesiology, which makes him living proof that you do not have to be an honest person to get a doctorate. In that recent video that he posted, he explains how he arrived at the belief that range of motion for any exercise should be cut off when the joints reach 90 degrees.
And once we started implementing the 90-degree method very precisely based on the science, not on what people in the field were saying that I need to do, but based on the science itself.
And then he spends the rest of the video explaining that the science in question involved trying stuff on himself and his clients and seeing how it felt.
Finally, we went to, okay, roughly 90 degrees, and my body didn't just feel better, but it began to heal itself completely to the point that I no longer had hip pain, knee pain, low back pain, and we noticed the same trend with our clients and people who we bring into the laboratory.
That's not science. Depending on who you ask, Jeff Cavalier of athlean-x is either putting the science back in strength.
What does that mean?
It'll be gone and he'll bring it back.
Or he barely knows his ass from his elbow.
Now do it the way I'm showing you here. Breathe out and tighten down.
What in heaven's name are you talking about?
The truth probably lies somewhere in between. He definitely has a strong understanding of anatomy and physiology, likely due to his master's degree in physical therapy. However, if you've seen his content and you believe that he has been actively keeping up with published exercise science over the last quarter century since he graduated, then I have some land in Florida, a crypto coin, and a lordship in Scotland to sell ya. He promotes fear of movement through his infamous Iron Graveyard. He pays lip service to progressive overload without it ever appearing in his programs. He's even found a way to fearmonger about sleep positions. Now, he has slapped the phrase science-based on his updated perfect workout series because the last one wasn't perfect enough. Because while he doesn't seem to keep up with research, he definitely keeps up with YouTube trends. Now, if you want to see the total polar opposite of Cavalier, allow me to introduce you to Barbell Medicine. They are actual medical doctors, which makes them the most justified use of calling yourself doctor on fitness YouTube, and they look like this. It's friggin' unfair, man. Their motto is literally the word nuance. They are so in the weeds of research and refusing to speak in absolutes that their content can border on unwatchable unless you are already a total strength and conditioning nerd. They exist in their own quiet little niche, largely undisturbed and bothering nobody. None of these callouts that I've mentioned ever talk about Picture Fit specifically, and it's a really good channel. The guy does fantastic breakdowns of new research using cute animations. Go subscribe. Lastly, Mr. Built with Science himself. If anyone has truly draped themselves in the concept of science-based lifting to market themselves, it's got to be this guy. Now, he does not have an advanced degree. He has a bachelor's degree in kinesiology,
which I had to try not to laugh at.
And if I'm being honest, I don't entirely disagree that a kin undergrad is probably the least impressive degree in this field. And I'm saying this as someone with not one, but 2 theater degrees. His style is reminiscent of Nippard, but he definitely has been caught misapplying research, such as when Greg Doucette called him out for his interpretation of a study about cardio.
Those 20 minutes of daily cardio that used to burn 200 calories and used to enable you to strip off fat, 4 weeks later will now burn considerably less calories and will bring your fat loss to a dead stop as a result.
Are you freaking kidding me? Jeremy, shame on you! Shame on you, Jeremy! How dare you say such nonsense!
If you go by number of videos, he also seems to have a fixation on posture, despite the fact that the very concept that posture needs to be fixed, let alone can be fixed, is bunk. But just like with athlean-x, the guy found the money button and he is pushing it like a lab mouse, pushing the pleasure button until it dies of dehydration. Okay, so we've covered Bromley's critiques and the influencers that he targeted. Now we are going to look at Natural Hypertrophy's rage bait. But first, I'm going to need a cat break. I've saved this part for later in the video because where Bromley's arguments seem to come from a pretty honest place, Natural Hypertrophy seems like he's doing something else. If we take him at face value in his various videos on this topic, he sees people at the gym who don't train very hard and don't get very good results, but they're doing exercises in a style that resembles science-based influencers. Therefore, he blames science-based influencers for the lackluster training of the people that follow them. The reason I take this with a grain of salt is because Natural Hypertrophy, frankly, has a pretty well-documented history of saying deliberately inflammatory things for attention.
Power building is an abomination.
Last year, he was able to bait all of fitness YouTube with that one, and then acted shocked that people responded to his rage bait with rage. He shits on Movement by David because he has the audacity to have different training goals. He calls himself a feminist chauvinist. His early videos were straightforward lifting content, but over the last couple of years, you can see a transition to thumbnails and titles clearly created just to piss people off. His recent video responding to Nippards is a continuation of that trend, and a demonstration that, frankly, it is much easier to sling mud than to bake bricks out of it.
Question number 1. Why do you pretend to not understand that when we're attacking science, we're really attacking you?
This is like kind of being a kid in a playground and one of the other kids asks you, "Hey, does your mom know you're gay?" There was a lot of homophobia in school when I went there. The answer is assumed in the question. And now, the kid being asked has to either accidentally admit that they are gay, or go through the effort of deconstructing the question, and either way, the person asking the question is getting what they want, which is a rise out of you. This isn't discourse, it's bait.
Question number 2. Why do you keep acting as if science-based content isn't a gimmick?
Like the first question, this isn't a question, it's an accusation. It's the shifting of the burden of proof. In short, it's lazy.
Why do you refuse to admit that this entire thing works like a cult?
Picking up on the pattern yet? So, to this question and the previous questions, I will simply respond by saying, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And yes, you can point out examples of science-based lifters who do the types of behaviors that you're describing. But by labeling all science-based lifters as being this, you have weakened your point tremendously. And it is not on the whole of the science-based community to offer you a response.
Why do you not police your own?
They do. That's all science is. It's not done perfectly by any extent of the imagination, as things like the replication crisis demonstrate, but it's frankly either ignorant or dishonest to just ignore that. And besides that, most people in the science and science-adjacent communities don't make a spectacle out of it for clicks.
When you're on social media, what is your purpose? You have to think about what is your purpose. Are you just trying to have a pissing match with another person in the field to make yourself feel better or feel smarter? Or are you trying to do something for the general good of society, right? If it's the latter, then what is your point of calling someone out publicly? If you have a critique about what they're saying, message them privately. You don't need to go and dogpile them to make yourself feel better. That's completely unproductive and, as Jess said, erodes public trust in both science and medicine.
Yeah. So in short, either you don't understand all of this, in which case you shouldn't be talking about it, or you don't care, in which case you shouldn't be talking about it.
Why do science-based influencers so rarely take accountability when they're wrong?
This isn't a religion, guy. You don't need to publicly renounce your previous beliefs every time that you change them in response to new evidence. Like, what specifically are you imagining here? What do you want?
Why is there so little tolerance for criticism within the science-based community?
Science is built on criticism. You have to be more specific. Now, he does offer an example here, specifically talking about how Mike Israetel's fanboys can get pretty aggressive in the comments section. And to that I say, yes, this is a thing that happens. Barbell Medicine's Facebook group is kind of a hellscape of dogma sometimes. It's also not necessarily reflective of the person they're subscribed to. The skill of managing a community is separate from the skill of creating content. When you have over 1 million subscribers, you just can't control their behavior that way.
Why do science-based lifters keep pretending that you're either science-based or some troglodyte that is just throwing weights around?
They don't. Next.
Why are you obsessed with optimization?
They aren't. Next.
Why do you welcome PED users in your ranks?
This isn't a cult. Science-based lifters can't excommunicate Israetel from talking about stuff on YouTube. As far as why natural science-based lifters will interact with someone like Israetel, I imagine it's because not everyone moralizes about drug use the way that you do.
Just say no.
Who do you listen to, and why? If we follow the standard of nullius in verba, which you should because it's Latin, then we start with what these influencers can actually prove. And what can they prove? That they are personally able to achieve results for themselves. In some cases, they are able to help their clients to also achieve results. In the case of science-based influencers, they can also bring evidence to the table in the form of published science, though it would take a close and literate reading of those papers to assess if that evidence is valid, and most people are just not going to do that. So, why do people believe who they believe? It's probably based on who they like. To me, the purest expression of what's really going on is what happened between Jeff Nippard and Mike Van Wyck a few months ago.
We all know the science-based guys. The science guys really need to answer this question before anything. Why is it that you remain so mediocre, yet you know so much?
I know I don't need to respond to this, but since he asked, using science-based training, I won Natural Bodybuilding Nationals and earned my pro card on the most competitive stage in the World Natural Bodybuilding Federation. I placed second in my first bodybuilding pro show, and while doing this, I set the Canadian record on the bench press, and I set a provincial record on the squat. I currently weigh 180 pounds at 5 foot 5 inches tall, which is pretty close to my natural limit given my height and my genetics. That's all besides the point though, because facts are facts. Information is either right or wrong. It doesn't matter who that information is coming from. If the people with the best physiques had the most knowledge, why would S.O.B need a coach?
And then Van Wyck confronted Nippard in the gym, and in the exchange you can see here, Van Wyck shoved Nippard by the throat. Twice. Big, enhanced guy, smaller, natural guy. Jock, nerd. This left me rattled, and I couldn't quite put a finger on why. I don't know either of these men personally, and yet this incident made me feel afraid. This was in part because of the bizarre fallout involving folks actually defending Van Wyck, and Van Wyck selling merchandise celebrating what he did, as though Nippard deserved violence for having the gall to contradict someone who is bigger than him. The truth is that popularity works pretty much exactly the same as it did in high school. If you like Van Wyck, you follow Van Wyck. If you like Nippard, you follow Nippard. Traditionally, the gym has been a jock space. Now, more nerds like me are actually not just showing up, but doing so confidently and using big words to talk about it. And we're doing what we do best, getting caught up in all the little details and enjoying the process of learning about the thing as much as we enjoy doing the thing. To some of the jocks, that makes us intruders. We have invaded their space, and we talk about it like we belong there.
But over the past number of years, it has been revenge of the nerds. And this isn't only in fitness, this has become life in general. As you guys have probably seen, nerds and dorks and those who were stuffed in lockers as kids, they have taken over pretty much every aspect of society. And everything sucks.
We even seem to be suggesting that we know more about it because we can read papers. Now, am I overgeneralizing? Absolutely I am. And I shouldn't, because that sucks. The truth is that a lot of big, strong, enhanced, meathead, bro-y, experience-based lifters shat all over Van Wyck in the aftermath of his attack on Nippard.
Knowing the context of the situation, who's gonna buy merch from this guy, or listen to this guy, or want to associate this guy?
And tons of experience-based creators seem basically unbothered by the mere existence of influencers talking about science. Look at someone like Alan Thrall. He might be one of the most experience-focused content creators you'll ever see, but he has been coached both by Natural Hypertrophy and Austin Baraki of Barbell Medicine. This whole argument is fake and a huge waste of everyone's time, including mine. So why is it happening at all? There is a thing that happens on the internet. I'm going to refer to it as the pineapple on pizza effect. Simply expressing a personal preference will make for a very boring conversation. I like pineapple on my pizza. Well, I don't like pineapple on my pizza. Now, turning your preference into an excuse for arbitrary tribalism? Now we've got ourselves a stimulating, if pointless, argument. I like pineapple on my pizza. Well, that's because you're a scumbag who would ruin perfectly good pizza just to spite the rest of us. How dare you accuse me of moral failing when you're the one who is racist against the proud Hawaiian people? Hawaiian pizza was invented by a Greek Canadian, you goober. And so on. You see, my thumbnail is a lie. You don't actually have to choose a side between science-based and experience-based. There's already a term for the synthesis of the two. Evidence-based. As Basement Bodybuilding put it, there really is no such thing as a science-based lifter. There isn't enough science for that to actually happen.
When science-based content is perceived as generally structured evidence, it's helpful. I just don't see it as anything more than that in most cases. The problem arises when people start to actually believe that you can base your lifting as a whole on science. I'll sound crazy saying this, but how can science-based lifting even be a real concept? It's much better described as science-refined lifting or science-filtered lifting. Science has never told Jeff Nippert how to program his workouts. It never told him what exercises to select. It never told him what technique is best and whether biomechanics are worth focusing on, or even help somebody become a biomechanics expert, because even within that, there's constant debate on what works and what doesn't. These are all things that can be educated guesses, but it is absolutely not science-based. It's science-implied, it's science-refined, science indicative, etc. But the base of any training program comes from your own experience, evidence from your peers, and successful lifters throughout history.
You have to try stuff for yourself, and you have to learn from those who have already been through the process. But science can help us to make those decisions more easily and more confidently. I was on a conference call back when I worked at a corporate gym. A senior member of the team confidently declared that the lying leg curl was superior to the seated leg curl, apparently ignorant of the fact that a recent study had been published that concluded the exact opposite. Now, you could misapply that science and say, well, I am never going to use a lying leg curl again, but both experience and science recognize the value of variation in training. So a more nuanced take could potentially be, if I could only choose one, I would choose the seated hamstring curl. But if I have access to both, I'll swap in the lying leg curl from time to time. You don't need science to lift, but it can help. You don't need to optimize your training, but it can help. But you know what definitely does not help? Bullying people over bullshit. Thanks for watching. Happy lifting. Now go get friggin' strong.